Hello and welcome to GREENFLEET Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today. I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Parker, who is Bridgestone Mobility Solutions EV Specialist and Corporate Sales Manager for WebFleet.
Good morning, Kate.
Richard. Lovely to see you again. I hope you're well.
As always, yes, thank you.
Good. The sun's shining here on the south coast, so we're
both
smiling.
Yeah. For once.
For once. Oh no, it's always sunny here. Right, today, Richard, you and I are going to be discussing some of the challenges that are facing SME fleets.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kick off the conversation reflecting on the current cost of living / energy crisis that is probably taking its toll more so on small businesses and as a result may be pushing them off moving to zero emission vehicles due to the high upfront cost. What advice would you give to those organisations?
Okay, so let's be empathetic to these businesses. You're right. There isn't probably one element of their whole operation that isn't going up in price. So, at every point, they're going to do that. And for these fleets, particularly if they're smaller, I guess, changing one vehicle to a zero tailpipe emission vehicle and it being wrong for the business is a huge significant impact. So let's have some empathy with the challenges that they're facing at the moment. However, what I would say is that this is a when, not an if situation that we're in, and there are potentially situations for these organisations where their customers may start to impart and leverage requirements on them to fulfil decarbonisation strategies, and whether that's zero emissions or being able to measure and everything prove. So the first thing I would say is look, do not stop investigating and trying to understand how you can measure your baseline and understand what your contribution to the carbon footprint is, and B, then start to look at ways to do it. Now, from a financial perspective, because we talked about the upfront cost, we have to recognize that these vehicles, the zero tailpipe emission vehicles, will not sustain a business model change transition if you're just looking at the upfront costs, as you may have done in purchasing your ICE vehicles. You really have to go back to the drawing board and start understanding the cost of your existing fleet on a total cost of ownership model, and then looking at the future transition in the same methodology of a total cost of ownership, and looking at the whole life value to the business, to the cost of the business in that context. So that could be the energy infrastructure, the energy costs, which should hopefully and will come down in time. We know they're a challenge at the moment, but hopefully they will further strengthen some of the in-life savings, as well as we know perhaps the maintenance. There's some established facts now that the maintenance budgets are lower than the equivalent ICE vehicles. So again, that total cost ownership model really does need to be considered and keep being reviewed by the organisation, by these SMEs, to make sure that they can see when the opportunity arises to make that transition.
Yeah. Okay. Really good advice, Richard. And I think as you've said, there's no part of their organisation that isn't under pressure at the moment, and that really chimes with me. There was research from Lloyds Bank that said that 77% of small businesses do not have a net zero strategy in place. And that net zero isn't just about fleets, it is about the whole business. So it is quite daunting. 34% of the people surveyed said it was down to lack of knowledge. You've mentioned total cost of ownership, which is something that is frequently bandied around, but perhaps these SMEs don't have a ready reckoner tool, and how does this fit with the broader strategy? So where can they go to get advice and support and information about decarbonisation?
So I've been in fleet for 23 years, and I think this is the one time I really remember where community and collaboration between even between competitors is higher than it's ever been. So, and the reason I say that is because we'll get to some of the detail in a minute for the SMEs, but actually finding the right sources of discussion of articles invariably lead to very quick access to other specialisms that you might need in the transition. So there seems to be a growing community of people willing to collaborate and work to support and facilitate businesses getting access to everything they need. So outside of that broad spectrum, some of the places I suggest that people look is, try and find the time. And again, let's be empathetic to business owners at the moment. They will be fulfilling multiple tasks for their owners. They're not like the large corporates who have a specific role of an ESG manager or a fleet manager. So let's be empathetic to the fact that there is diary pressures invariably on the people responsible in these organizations. But there's a number of the fleet shows, are re-establishing the physical presence again. I was at the CV show this week, and it feels very different again than from those COVID. It felt like it got going, and the reason I think it's relevant is because there wasn't a single stand, there was a mix of charge point, of vehicle manufacturer, of payment systems. They were all present, and they were all there on an EV transition. So, there's plenty of shows on the agenda. So, if you just search EV transition shows or something along those lines on the internet, you will find shows that can actually, a quick walk around will give you some very quick access and some quick learnings to some of the knowledge. I guess on a more online community basis, let's not forget GREENFLEET and the work that they do, and the number of events like the one coming up in the north. These are all great sort of forums where broad discussions can happen. And we know there's a number of online sort of organizations that produce monthly sort of webinars where they're very community based, and any question is not a stupid question. Those sorts of things. I'm moving through to the more formal sort of like the Zemo partnership and the Government for Office for Zero Emissions and the Energy Savings Trust. They're all really good reads of information that are presented in layman's terms, and I think that's the important part of this. To get started, you don't want to be starting with the technical capabilities of batteries and the chemical makeup of batteries. You need to start with the law. So everything I mentioned there are all really good places where you can start to dip your toe, start to understand some of the new terminologies you might have to get your head around, and without it being fearful.
And when you talk about Zemo, when you talk about EST, when you talk about OZ, these are neutral organisations. So you will get completely unbiased resources effectively from that. And you're right, you're absolutely right, because we're coming into show season. I think it feels like it at the moment. Okay, it may be a day out of your working week. But it does bring together, as you say, so many experts and stakeholders into one place that you can very quickly get a handle on that. Shout out, of course, to the GREENFLEET Road to Net Zero events, which are live, they're regional, you can test drive vehicles, there are seminars and access to experts who, again, who give you that unbiased information.
And the other thing as well is I find that with these, it's not just the experts, the access, it's like the events themselves, the audiences are all similarly in a similar, many of them are literally just starting out on this journey. I know there's a lot of media coverage for the big corporates who've changed, but actually there is a lot of people attending these where they're in the audience in the same boat that you are. And actually the camaraderie and building of understanding can help, in the same place with you working with these people as well, and learning from each other.
SMEs look to their peers, don't they? They want, well, what vehicle have you got? What's your experience? Where do you get it, serve it, all of it.
I'm going to say, because they want to de-risk, don't they? The impact of getting it wrong is so significant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what about the charging? So you've got, if you're looking at the vehicle, but you also have to make considerations about the charging. What should people be taking into account before they invest in the vehicles?
Okay. Well, you and I have talked about this many times. A lot of people think, start with the vehicle because it's line of sight from what they've already got and how it's going to do the job. But I think if you talk to anyone who's worked in this arena for a while, it is start with your infrastructure, and it's not start with your infrastructure for one vehicle. It's like, think about by 2030, 2035, what am I going to need from an infrastructure perspective? Because potentially the costs will be significant, potentially. But equally as well, there may be ways, particularly if you're on, small business sites and things like that, that actually collectively, knowing that we've all got to get to this place, the collective conversation between them may help mitigate some of the costs as well. So it's having a broad look at what's needed there. And then as we get to the vehicles, again, I don't think anyone's pretending that any business has to take everything on day one over to a zero tailpipe emission vehicle. So it is find your low-hanging fruit of your existing. So, I mean, we haven't talked about it yet, but clearly telematics, if you've got it already from whatever provider, that basic data will tell you what the vehicle is doing, where it's going, where it's stopping. And it's not another big leap to find out, okay, is the charging infrastructure where that vehicle is dwelling? Can I make it work? Will it get the whole job done on a single day? And then knowing that charging infrastructure is there to support it, you can bring the vehicle in, and I would encourage any SME to drip feed them, because the learnings, even if you've done an inordinate amount of research, the learnings will still be there for your business, and there'll be things that come out that perhaps weren't considered. And this goes back perhaps to your earlier question about potentially stopping. I think one of the things that's coming down the track, if we're not careful, is that at 2027, for example, there is a rush to get these vehicles in, because either the centralized legislative environment, or whether it's scope 3 emissions and their contracts that they're up for are requiring them to do it. And at that point, the learnings could be more significant, because you're bringing more vehicles in, and therefore there could be potentially more risk to the organization. So look at your charging infrastructure, look what you need now, find the low-hanging fruit, and then start to work with it.
And I would add into that, I think it would be it's highly unlikely that you will be able to produce a large number of electric vehicles without an element of operational change, which could be the straw that breaks the camel's back for an SME business. But having worked for large organisations and small organisations, actually, I think SMEs are much better poised to make operational change. They can do it very quickly. They're very nimble. They're very flexible.
I agree.
And if it doesn't work, then they can try something else, while big organisations are still working out whether or not they
16 signatures to get anything done.
Trying to be positive, SMEs have a secret weapon that some of the larger organisations that we talk to and that we're looking to lead the way are grappling with, really struggling with. And
to that point, actually, when we think about what we said in the last question about what support is available, there are a number of cities as well, and I'm pretty sure this will grow, that are giving free access to electric vehicles solely for SMEs. In the city.
There are.
So again, when you're doing your Google searches, is what support is available in my local area, for transition, because again, that gives them the risk-free access to understand if these vehicles, how they'll fit into their operations. So
I know Leeds were doing it.
Coventry are doing it.
And Coventry, I think.
And I believe, I heard of Warwick, but it's national. It's supported by national highways. From a funding perspective. And again, it's when you're doing your Google searches, what support is available for me in my area, may well throw up things that you and I can't be necessarily always visible of, that may help them get there as well.
And a lot of dealerships will be able to loan vehicles for demonstration vehicles for a period of time as well. So there is stuff. Okay, so we always, myself included, always zoom straight in on zero emission vehicles. And actually, more to the point, electric vehicles, because of their availability today. But beyond zero emission vehicles, you've mentioned telematics already, but what other ways can small businesses reduce their emission transport operations?
Okay, so I'm going to go into the obvious stuff in a minute around sort of idling, stopping people idling, doing the trips in these. So with on a principle of, if you take a mile out of your journey, if you improve the MPG of a vehicle, you are already cutting your carbon footprint. So anything that works towards that. So we'll discuss that in detail in a minute. But actually, over the last few weeks, there's been something that's been a bit of a realization for me in terms of this is, at the end of the day, the driver of that vehicle is the one who affects the change. The business may ask the driver to perform in a particular way, but actually how that driver fulfills that is the one thing that has the direct impact on the project. And one of the things that we're starting to become quite visible of at the moment is the cost of living crisis affecting driver well-being. Okay. And if a driver is, for example, spending 8 hours alone in a vehicle, what is their mind like if they're thinking when they go home tonight, can I heat my house tonight? Can I feed my children because of the things that are going on? So we've been working with one organization, and it is a large corporate, but they have actually started with driver well-being in mind. Okay. So they have trained all their line managers to be mind coaches and understand the well-being side and the narrative. And they've done that. So there's an assessment of the driver, and there's actually practices in place that at a certain point in time during the day, if they're about to exceed their working day, there's an automated text message. It's using our technology, but it's an automated text message that actually goes to the driver's line manager. And then there is a conversation about whether that driver is still fit for work or things like that, and the well-being. Right. So there's all that process. Now, the outcome is that they have instigated a project to reduce speeding. But because the mindset of the driver is in the right place, they have brought that on. That's been successful, as well as everything else dropping, such as accident levels and things like that.
Yeah.
So driver well-being at this point in time, I think, is really key for any organization who wants to reduce the carbon footprint. And the carbon footprint is the obvious stuff that we've done, that people will know about in the audience. Is, yes, did you do the need to do the trip? How was the driver driving? Did they, have a heavy right foot? Were they braking and accelerating harshly? But also beyond that as well, payload. Is the same thing in the van just because of the way it is? Does it need to be in the van or the car?
Yeah.
Are your tire pressures inflated correctly? They all have a massive impact.
Okay.
So, headline.
So I love that. I love it. I love it.
Right.
Because it's just allow a little bit of time in the day to check your tire pressure. And why not check your water bottles at the same time, because it can ruin your day.
Yeah.
And the payload is a really good one. Really encourage. It's good for the business as well. It saves on fuel. But also it reduces the risk of theft and other things if you're not carrying around things unnecessarily. All linked to well-being. Personally, I love it when I get a car burns past me, and then at the next set of lights I'm sitting behind it again. Exactly. Because actually, how much? Do you actually get where your final destination is faster?
No.
All you're doing is aggressively accelerating and aggressively braking, which is again bad for the performance of the fuel economy.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. So when you see speeding, one of the things this organization have been working with have done as well is, instead of turning to a driver and say stop speeding, they've reversed the question and go, why are they speeding? And that can lead to a number of different, as you said, if you know you're going to get to your destination on time and then waiting without pressure, you won't speed because you're relaxed in the environment in which you are, and it's a better for your own mindset and where you are. So they have asked, okay, what has led to that? And as a result, they've been able to address far more things within the business that have provided the positive improvement. And again, all leading to reducing the carbon footprint. All of these things have a number of different outputs financially, operationally, but we talked, the question was about decarbonisation. And at a headline, if you reduce the mileage you're doing, if you improve the MPG of your existing fleet, you will reduce the impact of your carbon footprint.
Yeah. and save money, you know. So
yeah,
this
and
is
save, absolutely,
this
yeah,
is a great partnership.
yeah.
Richard, it's been a pleasure talking to you as always. Thank you very much for your insight today. Thank you, of course, to Webfleet for joining Greenfleet Talks.
Pleasure, as always.
And thank you for watching. Please tune again to GF365 again soon.